you say it, when you say it, where you say it. And I believe that we're in a building right now, we're in a congregation, we're in a family right now, that we can just speak clearly. If I have to be so careful as to process and weigh exactly the right way to say every word I'm going to say today, you guys aren't having lunch, you're having dinner after service, okay? So we're just going to get through this. So before I get started, I really feel like it's an important thing to shine light on things that are going well and people that are doing well. And so we've got a few students here today. First, I want to bring up Logan. You guys don't know Logan. He's the one with the pompadour, the hair right now. He's already almost the tallest in the room, so watch the hair height doesn't do much. But he's a guy. Logan is a guy that has done so much for this church. You guys might not know him, but as I look across the front row and I look across some of the families we have in the back and just people in the room, there are so many people that are in this room because of hooks that Logan has thrown in the water. And he has made my job as a pastor easy. He's a guy that is always looking to include people. I think that's one of the most incredible traits about him that he probably stole from his father, because his dad's the same way. We love having guys like Logan. Next one will be Natalie. Natalie did something cool. This is your third Sunday in a row, right? Yeah, she was working at Chipotle, new job at Chipotle, and they were scheduling her over the time here on Sunday morning. And I know for some of you guys, missing Sunday has never been an option, but in today's world, it takes an effort, it takes a decision, and it takes a point of saying, I'm going to prioritize this in my life. And that's something that Natalie's done, and I think that if all of our students could do that, we'd be in a great place. And then last thing I want to say to bring up is Shane over here. Shane, I know that this is taboo, and I'm supposed to talk about this for whatever reason, but Shane gave his first tithe deposit last week, and I know that that's something that, as a pastor and a person behind a microphone, we're not supposed to talk about money. But my Bible says in Matthew 6 that where a man's treasure is, his heart is also. And I just look at that, and Shane, we've got to see you grow from, well, you know what, to where you are. We all know what. We've got to sit and watch you guys grow. You twins have just grown in incredible ways. And, there's no doubt where your heart's at. We're excited to see what God keeps doing for you. So, money is a strange thing. Something that, like I said, it's kind of tough to talk about. But I'm not talking to you guys today about money. I'm going to talk to you today about something strange that we do with our money. And that's insurance, right? I remember when I was young, some of you guys know, I grew up in the forest, very uneducated, on the run from the police like my whole life, all of that fun stuff. And so when I came into the adult world, I never even heard about insurance until I was 19. That'll tell you what, I had no idea. When I heard about it, I thought, this is so strange. So you go out and you earn money, and then you give it to someone you don't know, and then if things don't go the way you expect, hopefully they'll give some of it back and help you out, right? Didn't make a lot of sense to me. And so when I thought about it, I thought, well, of course, what if I never get in an accident? Then does that mean that I just roll that money away my whole life? And I thought, well, what if I get in an accident every day? And I started scheming and thinking about that. I could start with a really junk car. And some of these guys are like, oh, we'll get you a model year newer with 10,000 less miles. I'm like, enough accidents, and I will be in a nice car that I actually need. Right? I'm thinking about that. And then I realized that when I found out how expensive it can be, well, maybe I'll just drive extra safe. Both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, and it'll be like paying myself to be a good driver, just saving that money, right? These are the thoughts of somebody who's never, didn't grow up knowing what insurance was. And so I might look like a fool to some of you right now, but here it is. But it wasn't until I was older, and this is probably the most important thing to understand about insurance, is that there is a difference between good insurance and bad insurance. And most insurance is bad insurance. That's what I learned. I knew that at that point I learned that the government wants you to have insurance. They tell you you have to have insurance, and you get in trouble if you don't. So I would invest just enough to be able to get a little card saying I have insurance and putting that in my wallet. I remember I tore an ACL. I tore my left ACL maybe 8 or 9 times at this point, and had just kept going because I didn't have insurance or money. And so I just kept going, and I ended up really hurting my right ACL. And I'm insurance system. I was like, this is terrible. And I became a bit jaded because of that. So that when we moved down here to Arizona, Shayla said, Zech, we are going to get insurance that's good and that actually does something. And in my mind, I'm thinking, that's just more money that I'm giving to this scam, right? And because she's my wife, inevitably I will listen, and so I listened. And we got the good insurance, and then ended up hurting it again, and ended up going in and getting, that's the thing with these guys, or just your body in general, is if you don't just take care of it, it's just going to keep piling up. And so my left knee was fully arthritic before 25 years old because I just kept, that'll tell you. Ended up going in, having both of my knees rebuilt, and I can't even tell you, I was thinking $2,800 for an ibuprofen. There's a good joke that if you go into the doctor's office, and you say, doctor, it hurts when I do this. What they're going to tell you is, okay, I know exactly what you need to do. Don't do that anymore. I'll send you out $2,500 bill. So I was terrified. I was like, man, I just got both my knees rebuilt. Like, I might have to sell my soul. Like, I don't know how we're going to pay for this. Like, this is, and at the end of it, nothing. It ended up costing me. I was like, wow, my wife is a sage. She's so wise. Like, this is a good thing. And that's the moment that I realized that there is, in fact, a difference between good insurance and bad insurance. Unfortunately, for anybody that's aware of it, you don't know for sure if you have good insurance or bad insurance until you're using it. And that's usually when you realize, oh man, this is bad insurance. Yeah. Moving on. So it's safe to say that in the world that we live in today, it doesn't matter how carefully you drive. I'm not just talking about in your cars, I'm talking about in life in general. It's out of your hands. Everyone in this room is an instant away from being up to your neck in things that, problems and issues, and most of them things that are no fault of yours, but I'm telling you right now, you're a moment away from needing to check your insurance. And thankfully in this room, I believe that some of you guys know where I'm going with this, and so I think that we're pretty good. But this is the part of the message that can be underappreciated. It might not be appreciated at all, but you can blame it on my youth. If I'm naive in this, you can blame it on my age. I still have room to grow, but if you're betting on America as your insurance, if you're betting on yourself, you're going to fail. So my Bible says, I know this is the most un-American thing to say in Cowboy Church, I know, please don't shoot me, but Luke 11 says that a house divided or a nation divided against itself cannot stand. These are written in red, as if the words in the Bible aren't enough. They're written in red, meaning spoken by Jesus. Jesus himself said, a house that is divided against itself cannot stand. Not probably fall, or not, has the potential if something really bad happens to fall. It says it cannot stand. And I hate politics because I just look at the whole thing, and while I've got a lot of opinions on it, really what this thing has come down to is it is a war between two parties. That's it. When I remember from the last election and things that we're seeing now, and just let me shoot, guys. I'm not shooting at anybody. I'm just, from where I'm sitting, when you watch a WWE commercial and the music is the same music they use in the politician debates, like they're using the same music between the two, and that tells you that we aren't interested in what's, as a country as a whole, as this country isn't interested in doing the right thing. It's interested in winning the war. It's interested in one party versus the other. And from where I'm sitting, I don't know. I cannot find a single earthly path that we can take to reconciliation. The two sides are, all it takes is a phone call where they ask you, which of these two would you vote for? And you just listen to the opinions of one. And it's almost like that human being is diametrically opposed to me in all ways. And they think they're right enough that they've gone into office, like, because they believe in this thing that they need to, is that there is no earthly way to reconcile these two. And I'm not a political expert, so bear with me on this. The prophets were despised in their own time. So I'm not saying I'm a prophet. They were despised in their own time for speaking out against the evils that they saw in their nation. More than that, it's not just, people don't mind when you speak consequence at the end of what we're dealing with right now in our country is that we will fall. That's a fact. And if the virus, what's happening right now, hasn't told you that what we used to think was safe to bet on, what we used to think would be good for us and what would be there forever, if this hasn't taught you that you can't rely on that, then you're beyond my teaching. I mean, not that I'm the greatest, but I can't hand you anything. That's the mentality you have. You have to see that. If you look at just about every major institution that exists in our country, it's messed up. It's flawed. The fact that there is money involved in every single one of them has brought nothing short of chaos and destruction into every single one of those. I'm not going to get into it because I'm not jumping on one side or the other right now. What I'm telling you guys is that if you say it's going to be all right because I'm American, no matter what happens, I'm a Republican, I'll be fine. And no matter what happens, I'm this or that, I'm a Christian, whatever, it's not enough. So let's get into some scripture real quick. Because fortunately for us, I said that the only hope that we have as a country is reconciliation, not with each other. Because I feel like a lot of us get so stuck thinking, oh, we need to reconcile with each other. And the reality is that we as human beings lack the tools to make that happen effectively. What we need is reconciliation with God. Amen. And a result of that, a byproduct of becoming close with God, is that enemies drop their weapons and become friends and serve each other and don't just love each other because if we don't, Dad will be mad at us, but genuinely love each other. That's where reconciliation happens, is when we are reconciled with God. And I believe that both sides of the line are in big need of it. So if you can, flip to Romans 10. This is where I'm going to get into a little expository preaching. So that means I'll probably be looking at my paper a little more than I have been, but we're with it. So Romans chapter 10, starting at verse 1. And let's just put ourselves in this a little bit if we can to see what we might get out of it. Brothers and sisters, this is the words of Paul. He says, my heart's desire and prayer to God for the Israelites is that they may be saved. So let's just say my heart and prayer for God is that America, right, might be saved. Like I said, if you've got an issue with how we're going to do this, just please spit out the phones and get the heart of it. For I can testify about them that they are zealous for God, but their zeal is not based on knowledge. Now, when it's talking about zeal, what that is actually expressing is an outward, something you can see on the outside. It's an outward expression of something that's going on inside of a person. The thing with zeal is that it doesn't always have its roots in knowledge like we're talking about here. You can see right now, if you get on Facebook, a lot of people with a lot of zeal, with no knowledge of what's actually happening. So what he's saying here is he isn't saying, oh, they're all bad people, but what's actually implying is that they genuinely do want to have holiness, and they have the appearance of holiness, but they don't quite understand how to get it. Verse 3, since they did not know the righteousness of God and sought to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. So this should kind of hit close to home for pretty much everyone. If you're not in this place right now, I can almost guarantee that at some point during your Christian maturing process, you were here. It was that you genuinely want to have righteousness and a right relationship with God, but you don't quite fully understand how to get it. And so what you do is you prematurely set out to build your own righteousness. So you're saying, I'm saved, I love God, all of that, now I need to be righteous. But instead of doing it with God's help and turning him to, and out of that relationship, righteousness being the result, you start to build your own form of righteousness, which is always striving, it's always difficult, it's a lot of work, and it almost always relies on other people's impression of you. Meaning that it's easy to appear righteous when I'm standing in front of a room with a microphone in my hand, in front of a room of believers that are also appear to be righteous. It's easy to be that in that place. But as soon as all of that's gone, you fall apart. The problem about building your own righteousness is, one, you'll never be satisfied because inside yourself, you know yourself. You know the thoughts that exist within you. If that righteousness is built by you without the help of the Lord, the person who is the least sold on it, I'll put it that way, is you yourself. Right? And you're always established concerning salvation, concerning righteousness, that it's really hard for us to accept a righteousness for ourselves that somebody else worked for, that somebody else paid for, that we didn't die for. Does that make sense? I know that, we talk about how Jesus died for my sins and things like that, but the reality is that righteousness starts when you realize that even on your best day, you don't hold a match to Jesus if he had a worse day on that. As understanding that even if I tried my entire life to build a righteousness that is worthy, it doesn't even compare to what Jesus already has. Right? So Christ, and this is verse 4, Christ is the culmination of the law, so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. This is where my insurance spill comes back into talk, right? This is where it kind of enters the conversation, is that Christ is the ultimate of the law. He is where every part of the law is culminated, and he has paid that price entirely. Meaning that when you get up to the seat of judgment, when you get to the end, when you're giving an account for your entire life and all of the debts that you've incurred, all of the mishaps, all of everything that has happened, you're in that moment where you're going to have to figure out whether you have good insurance or bad insurance. And just like in those situations, I couldn't in that first situation say, hold on, whoa, let me go get some good insurance real quick, and we'll come back and readdress this. That doesn't happen. It's in that moment that everything that the law can ask of you in that moment can be satisfied completely by Jesus himself, by what he did. Okay? That is a huge, huge thing. Because when I talk about sin, when I talk about, the debt of sin, the wages of sin and death, when I talk about all of that with students, there's this understanding that we have so much debt that we're unable to pay. But the truth is that we actually don't even have the currency required to pay for any debt at all, so big or small. Even if you've tried your entire life to be a perfect person. That's why the person who's been good their whole life is no closer than the person who's been really bad their whole life. Because neither one of them has the currency required to pay for any debt at all. So when you're in that moment in front of it, it says in here that Christ is the culmination of the law, meaning that everything that the law is asking, Christ fulfills. So that there may be righteousness for anyone who believes. That's powerful. That is it. I'm gonna tell you what. Spoiler: if you've got your insurance policy isn't anything other than the goodness of Christ, the righteousness of Christ, that's gonna be a bad day for you. I'll just tell you that. I'm gonna read 5 through 9 all together because I believe it's one thought. This is the one that's kind of tricky to get your head around. You have to kind of read it a few times. But it says, Moses writes this about righteousness that is by the law. Now the law, when it was given in the Old Testament, that is works-based stuff. That is, do this for this result, and you don't do this for this punishment, black and white, straight up like that. So Moses writes this about righteousness that is by the law, that the person who does these things will live by them. Not saying there's not wisdom, but the righteousness that is by faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend to heaven, or who will descend into the deep. But what does it say? The heart says, or the faith says, the word is near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart. That is the message concerning faith that we proclaim. If you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So there's a nice little chunk there. I'm not even going to lie, you have to read that like 3 times. And today I read it like 4 more times. Like, just making sure, because it seems so simple, but at the same time, we as human beings have this incredible, above any other species on the planet, we have this incredible ability to make simple things complex. Like no one else can do, nothing else on the planet seems to do that. My dogs don't do that. They make complex things extremely simple. But you read this, and really what it's talking about, particularly the 2, I think the first one you kind of understand, but who will ascend into heaven, or who will descend into the deep? What it's saying is that the righteousness that you need in your life, the righteousness that the Lord is trying to give to you, you don't have to say, all right, we are going to have to be so holy that we're going to ascend to heaven and get that righteousness for ourselves. And at the same time, it's saying who will descend. You don't have to defeat death, hell, and the grave yourself the same way that Jesus did in order to attain that righteousness. But what he says is that it's as close as your mouth and your heart. That righteousness, the one that you should want and desire over everything else that this life has to offer, those things, what it is as close as your mouth and as your heart. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God did raise him from the dead, and that's it. You do that. That's it. That's as easy as signing the paper. Like that is what it is. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Verse 10 says, "For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved." Together. Right? We might have a lot of one or the other, but I think it's important that we remember to do these things together. As the scripture says, that anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. I remember the feeling, it was the most embarrassing moment of my life, walking into that, limping into that, rolling into that first hospital with my insurance, thinking I was good, and then they just were like, I handed my card, and the lady looked at it and she laughed, and she's like, "Yeah, that's not gonna help." It's like, damn, it was like a $10,000 premium. I was like, dude, that's crazy. The poorest people get those policies. How in the world are they gonna get 10,000 premium? I remember just sitting there, and I kind of felt a little bit ashamed. I was like, man, I should, because I know that Shayla, it wasn't the first time she had brought that up when we came down here about getting one that's good. And I sat there and I thought 100% when I came in here, I had no fear. I thought I was going to be good and taken care of, and I'm rolling out of here in really worse shape than I came in, because now I'm just as in pain. One Tylenol didn't do anything, I'll tell you that. I'm just as in pain, and I'm rolling out of here realizing that there's a bill coming my way that I just don't have the money to. I think I was getting paid $100 a month, like to be a youth pastor at that point. It was all the church had, and that's all. And I was getting paid nickels and dimes to coach sports teams and stuff, and I was like, there's no way in the Western Hemisphere that what's coming for me that I have the ability to deal with. Cars weren't running, and it was a mess. And I just got married, and I was like, I'm not contributing anything. I'm sorry. I felt shameful. And it says here that there's another scripture that says, "For those whose hope is in the Lord will never be put to shame." Amen. And that really comes to life for me. I know that's a petty example, but that really comes to life. That is the hope that I want for myself, I want for my wife, I want for my youth students, I want for everybody in here. Amen. That's the hope that I want for my enemies. That's the hope that I want for the world. That's what I want for America. Verse 12. "For there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all, and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." So what if in that scripture he said, there's no difference between Republican and Democrat, and black and white, and Seahawks fan and Cardinals fan, or, what if there was no difference between anybody? Do we really believe that salvation is as close at hand to some of the people we call our enemies, or some of the people we just don't understand, or some of the people that whatever it is? Do we really believe that salvation is as present for them as it is for us? Right? Your mission is not to fix your neighbor. And I've already learned this, so I know you guys know this, but you don't even have the tools to fix your neighbor. You don't have the ability to change a single person on this entire planet, except by reconciling them to the Lord, through love, through doing those types of things. One of my favorite sayings that Pastor Wayne has is that God guts his own fish. I love that saying. I'll never forget that saying. I'll probably say it right before I die. I'm hoping to remember it that long. It is so good that God cuts his own fish. We get to be fishers of men, right? We get to reel them in. But we don't have to worry about that. We don't worry about creating righteousness in somebody else. If I was still concerned, as I used to be, about making sure that my students were as righteous as they ought to be, like if I was trying so hard to force them into righteousness, I would have quit a long time ago. Verse 14. What time is it, my friends? In that case, no. Verse 14. How then can they call on the one that they have not believed in? Because you might, when I say Republicans and Democrats, right? They think so differently than I do. Like, I know they're a bad person just because look at what they think and look at what they believe. Like, they're lost. That person has no common sense like that, you know. But it says right here, the very next, to respond to those excuses, the very next scripture says, how then can they call upon the one that they've not believed in? And how can they believe in the one whom they've not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching it to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. This is how the economy of the kingdom of heaven works. See, somebody who had already gone through all of it was sent and preached the gospel in my vicinity at one point. And I heard it. And when I heard it, I was forced to wrestle with it and grapple with it. And ultimately, I came to believing it. And I professed with my mouth, because I believed in my heart that God is who he says he is, and that he did raise Jesus from the dead, and that he paid the debt, and I don't have to worry about figuring out how I'm going to pay for that bill when it comes, because it will come. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I came to that point, and the very next thing that happened is after I said, God, I believe in you, I love you, I serve you all. The very next thing is I was sent on a mission, just like every one of us, to go out and preach the gospel and say, not all of you guys have to hold, you actually don't even have to have a microphone to preach the gospel. You know, they didn't have microphones in the first century church. And they actually didn't have buildings this nice for the most part of the first century church. They just went out and did it. And that's what happened for me, is that all of those things happened. And I went out and I brought the gospel wherever I went. And then I suddenly found myself in Sedona, Arizona. You know, in one of the most loving churches that you could ever possibly imagine. Running with the coolest kids on the planet. Married to the most incredibly successful, powerful, independent woman there is on the planet. Living a life that is so much better than I ever could have pieced together of myself, especially if I would have had to worry about my own righteousness. I probably have stepped on a few toes on accident along the way, but I know my insurance covers that. Okay? So I'm gonna throw this last one in here for you guys. Is that the world is setting on fire around us. It is a fever pitch right now. And if you still are putting your hope and your trust and your peace in the hands of your country, or your favorite politician, or yourself, or this church, or a human being in general, you will be put to shame. Amen. It's going to happen. The Bible says, for those whose hope is in the Lord, will never be put to shame. Meaning that even if I lose everything around me right now, I don't even want to think about how bad that'd be, but even if I do, it's okay. Because my insurance covers it. No matter what happens, the power of the gospel is not that bad things don't happen. I've said this before. It's that no matter what happens, we have victory. You could lose it all, and you still have victory. Amen. So my last little thought, musicians, you can come up if you want. I'm going to share with you guys a hyper consolidated version of what I got to share with the students. And it's specifically concerning what's going on right now. We're talking about riots and protests and all of the things that are happening right now in that front. You know, in the Bible, it talks about, there's a parable that Jesus gives about a man goes in and sows seed, good seed. And in the night, the enemy comes and sows in weeds, right? And they start to grow together, and the servants come and say, Master, we thought you planted good seed. Why is it that weeds are growing up? And he says, an enemy did this. Okay, so should we go and pick all the weeds? Jesus' response is no. Because in pulling up the weeds, you'll also damage the wheat. Meaning that God is doing, even amidst all of the weeds that we see right now, even amidst all the bad stuff you see right now, even amidst all of the I don't want to call them excuses because I don't want to just like belittle anybody, but all of the reasons that we have listed to just push things aside or to just burn the field down, God is still doing really good and really necessary things in this right now. And even if you don't see it, because I'll tell you what, when weeds and wheat grow Now, you want to be careful about that. But what he says is let it go. Trusting that God will take care of it. Right? Your righteousness is not at stake because you're not actively trying to force somebody else to think differently, to speak differently, to be more righteous. Your righteousness is not at stake because you aren't actively forcing anybody to change. Your righteousness is at stake when you stop believing that the Lord is the Lord of your life as much as he is yours. And I'm telling you what, sometimes you just got to let the weeds grow, knowing that at the end of that scripture he says, when it's time, talking about God, we're going to pull the weeds up first, we're going to bundle them up, and we're going to burn them up like they didn't exist. And then we're going to deal with the weed the way that it's supposed to be dealt with. We can't be hasty. One of the best scriptures in that, or scriptures, one of the best quotes from the Lord of the Rings. Mustn't be hasty. Slow it down. Mustn't be hasty. Knowing that if we are hasty, guys, listen, if you're hasty in this situation, you might uproot somebody else's victory. You might uproot somebody else's freedom. And I know that it's hard for bad things to happen. And I'm not saying don't speak out against evil in that way. You don't just have to let evil happen. But if you find yourself in a position where your enemies are doing a better job of loving people and listening to people than you as a Christian are, or chew on that for yourself. I'm not going to chase it down. I'm having just as much of a time like this as anybody else is, trust me. But I'm not losing sleep at night anymore. Because I know that the Lord sees every hurting person. He sees everyone who's using this situation for their own gain. He sees everyone who's sitting quiet. He sees everyone who's being hasty. I'm just saying, just let the Lord be the Lord. And let's get back to the mission. Our mission is just in the same way that we heard, we believed, and we spoke about it. So we go out and we share that truth. We share that good news. Listen, guys, the world's on fire. It's never been easier. It's never easier to sell insurance than when stuff is going wrong everywhere. Say, hey, if you haven't noticed, the world is not as dependable as it thought. It made you think it was. I've got an insurance policy over here that you don't even have to wait till you die to get.